Leading global expert on religious terrorism says the Christchurch attacks were not just based on racial hatred, but was a form of Christian terrorism that's deeply entwined with far-right white supremacist beliefs and a growing phenomenon around the world. Joining me now is Professor Douglas Pratt. Douglas, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming in. Christian terrorism, what do you mean by that?
It sounds pretty extreme, and because it is extreme, it actually comes out of Christian extremism. Terrorism is the end point, if you will, of a line of ideological development that might begin with sort of some kind of belief system, moves through into an aggressive kind of a phase, and finally impositional, where the ideology seeks to impose itself on others. Now, in this particular case, I don't know what the terrorists' religious affiliations are, if any. That's almost not the point. The point is actually how it ties into the ideology that he's drawing on to justify his actions and to guide him what he does.
So given that, how does it entwine into far-right white supremacist beliefs?
Okay, one of the main things with this kind of terrorism, which also links to Jewish terrorism, is a reference in the Bible to the book of Numbers, chapter 25. And in there's an account of a particular action carried out by a priest named Phineas. And that action has all the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing, of acting on behalf of God, but not being directed, acting from within oneself. It's the effective model of lone wolf terrorism. It was used by the young man who murdered the Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. It was behind Anders Breivik, and so on. So this kind of trope of terrorism comes out of an extreme reading of a particular text in the Christian Bible and the Hebrew Bible. Muslims can do the same thing with the Quran. You can take select texts and use them as your reference point to justify an ideological position. In recent times, everybody's been focused on Muslims and the way they interpret their text. But what's been missed is that there's an awful lot of the similar kind of dynamic going on within the wider Christian world, particularly with that is linked to the alt-right and highly conservative Christianity that is antithetical towards Islam, for example, and that all comes together in this incident.
You compare this to the events that happened in Norway.
Yes.
But there were no Muslims involved. So
no.
How do you explain that? How do you explain it?
Different target, but same modus operandi and same intent. The intent is to stir up the white race against the invaders. That was Breivik's basic platform, and it's the same as our one here in Christchurch. That's the name of the game, which is why, in my mind, the terrorism act on Friday, terrible though it was, is only Act 1, because there is a whole pattern that will emerge. It's already been flagged by people's concern about the fact that he's chosen to represent himself in court, and will that be used as a platform, which Breivik did. And that's part of the whole package. This is a whole platform of trying to stir up race hatred premised on a particular worldview that buys into certain Christian interpretations.
So you're saying Act 1
Yep.
was the attack?
Yep.
And Act 2 is the
court trial.
Do we see an Act 3?
Yes, because he knows he's in a country that's not going to execute him. So therefore, there's going to be a whole history after that, same with Breivik, of appeals, of requests for certain kind of treatment. I've been told I'm actually vulnerable because if I'm in a prison population, I mean, let's face it, he's a white supremacist, terrorist, going to go to jail. Where in New Zealand? What jail is going to be able to take him? So he's going to be a thorn in the flesh of our justice system for a long, long time. In the meantime, two things can happen. One, while he's in prison, he's likely to radicalise others who are also white. And secondly, while he's in prison, he will attract also the ongoing interest of the far-right, alt-right movement from around the world. And he clearly represents something far bigger than what's here in New Zealand.
Could we, dare I say it, see retaliation?
That is possible. I mean, there's already been indications of that from overseas. Hopefully it won't happen here in New Zealand, because I think at the moment the impressive thing about New Zealand's reaction so far is the incredible sense of enveloping the Muslim community, the victims, in their suffering and their pain. But in all these kind of processes, when you have a trauma and you go for that reaction of grief, pain, sorrow and so on, an anger will emerge. A kind of, why? And at the moment, for example, the anger is emerging in relation to guns. So we're looking at tightening up gun laws. Now, I'm not opposed to tightening up gun laws, but I think we need to be careful not going too far down that track, because that is a side issue. That was just simply the weapon of choice. He could choose other weapons, and others can choose other weapons. We've seen that. The real issue is the ideology and the allowability of our society for that ideology to be fomented and displayed. And at the moment, we have no way of, I think, adequately of curtailing that and addressing it. It's been ignored by and large. I mean, what's coming through is little tidbits of information of people who've said, I raised this with so-and-so, but nothing's happened, kind of thing. And that is reflective of the fact that for a long time now in the public imagination, the concern or terrorism has been identified with Islamic activity. And yes, we know people, wave guns around and walk down the street and wave flags and so on. One of the interesting things is some years ago, after 2005, that's when I got into this whole business of looking at the connection between religious sensibility or ideology and extremism and terrorism. And that led me to develop a profile and understanding, which has been used by various people around the world. It got me involved in Australia 2 or 3 times, and it demonstrated the way in which you have people who can articulate certain things and advocate things. They won't go so far as actually doing it, so we leave them alone. Then suddenly they do it. And the question becomes, at what point does a society say, no, this kind of rhetoric, this kind of attitude, this kind of display of negativity and rejection of others is not acceptable in our society?
So tell me now, what are the lessons we can take from this? Where do we go from here?
I think there are 2 things, really. There's a positive and a negative. The negative is there needs to be some kind of legislative approach in order to curtail the free expression, public expression of values and attitudes that are clearly antithetical to New Zealand society, and that's the racist and the rejection of others and so on and so forth. The second one is actually a positive one, which is the advocacy, and I hope this might happen now, of much more engagement with understanding the different religions that are in society, because at the moment our self-understanding of being secular is that religion doesn't belong in the public sphere. It's a private thing. But the reality is so much of religion is in the public sphere. And if we continue to ignore it and don't address it, then we get caught out by this kind of thing cropping up. Although, admittedly, he was an extremist who didn't wave a particular religious banner, his targets were a religious community, not a general immigrant community. Very particular, and his rhetoric all shows that his racist perspective is focused in on Islam and on Muslims to way above anybody else.